1. The rancher had told himself this was just another errand, no different from buying feed or fixing a broken fence. He drove into town before sunrise, the sky still bruised purple, dust curling behind his truck like something trying to follow him home. The livestock auction yard was already alive, booths scraping gravel, men shouting prices, animals lowing with the restless sound of being moved from one fate to another. He kept his eyes down, hat low, repeating the reason he'd come: one good cow, steady milk, quiet company in the evenings. That was all. He had learned to keep his wants small. Big wants hurt too much when they stayed empty. As he leaned against the rail, watching a brown and white heifer circle the pen, he felt it, the lightest tug on his coat, like a breeze that had learned his name. He turned, expecting to see a ranch hand or a curious bidder. Instead, there was a child. A little boy, maybe 6 or 7, too thin, his jacket hanging loose as if it belonged to a larger life he hadn't grown into yet. His hair stuck out in uneven tufts, and his eyes, those eyes, were too calm, too serious, like someone who had already seen endings. Before the rancher could speak, the boy leaned closer, rising on his toes. His voice was barely louder than the animal's breath. "It's my mommy's last day alive." The words didn't sound dramatic. They didn't tremble. They landed flat and heavy, like a stone dropped into deep water. The rancher felt something inside him seize, as if his lungs had forgotten how to work. For a moment, the noise of the auction drained away. No bell, no shouting, no hooves. Just that sentence echoing where his heart should have been. That's not a thing a kid should say," he finally managed, his voice rougher than he intended. The boy nodded once, solemn. "She said it's okay to tell the truth." He pointed toward the bleachers. The rancher followed the small finger and saw her. A woman sitting alone on the hard wooden bench, hands folded in her lap, posture careful, as if even sitting cost her something precious. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the morning light, and each breath lifted her chest with effort. Yet she was smiling, an easy, practiced smile, the kind meant to reassure children and strangers alike. When her eyes met her son's, the smile deepened, though the rancher noticed how quickly she had to look away, how she pressed her lips together afterward as if to keep something in. The auctioneer's bell rang, sharp and loud. Bidding started on the cow in the pen. The rancher didn't raise his hand. He couldn't. His fingers felt numb, his boots rooted to the dirt. "You here to buy?" the boy asked, as if they were discussing the weather. "Yeah," the rancher said slowly. "Just a cow." The boy considered this. "Mom says this one's gentle. She talks to it when nobody's looking." The rancher swallowed. "Does she?" The boy nodded again. "She says animals listen better than people." Something about that cut deeper than the whispered sentence had. The rancher thought of his own ranch, the empty kitchen table, the way he sometimes spoke out loud just to hear a human voice bounce off the walls. He had never told anyone that. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eli," the boy said. "My mom's name is Sarah." As if summoned, the woman coughed into a handkerchief, the sound thin and alarming. She straightened quickly, smoothing the fabric of her coat, pretending nothing had happened. Eli glanced back at her, worry flashing across his face before being carefully tucked away. "I gotta sit with her," the boy said. Then, after a pause, he added, "She gets scared when I'm not there." 2. He found himself sitting beside her without remembering the walk from the rail to the bleachers. The wood was cold through his jeans, and the smell of dust and animals clung to everything, but the woman's presence softened the harshness of the place. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the faint bluish shadows beneath them, the way her hands trembled slightly even when resting in her lap. Eli leaned against her side, small fingers hooked into her coat as if she might drift away if he let go. "I'm sorry," the rancher said, the words tumbling out awkwardly. "Your boy, he told me something." She studied his face for a long moment, then smiled gently, without surprise. "He does that," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Eli believes if people know the truth, they won't be afraid of it." "That's brave," the rancher replied, though it felt like the wrong word. She chuckled softly, which ended in a brief cough she tried to hide. "Or foolish, I haven't decided." Below them, the auctioneer's chant rolled on, numbers rising and falling like waves. The cow in the ring was nudged forward, hooves clacking on packed dirt. Eli watched with intense focus, his chin tucked against his mother's arm. "She likes that one," Sarah said, following the rancher's gaze. "The cow. I know it sounds silly, but she's gentle." Never kicked once while I was milking her. You milked her? He asked. For 2 years, she replied. I worked part-time at a small dairy. Or, worked. She paused, catching her breath. I didn't tell them I was sick. Couldn't afford to stop. The rancher nodded slowly. He understood that kind of arithmetic, the way survival reduced life to numbers and hours. You're selling her. She's not mine to keep anymore, Sarah said. But if she sells well, it'll cover rent another month. Maybe 2. She glanced at Eli, enough to get him through winter. Eli shifted, sensing the weight in her words. Mom says winter isn't scary if you have soup, he announced. Sarah smiled down at him. That's right, baby. The rancher felt something twist painfully in his chest. He thought of his own winters, long, silent nights broken only by the wind pressing against the house. He had soup. He had heat. He had space. Too much space. The auctioneer called out a higher bid. Sarah inhaled sharply, as if each number took something from her. The rancher realized she wasn't watching the cow so much as the future attached to it. You don't look like an auction regular, she said, turning to him. What brings you here? I needed a cow, he answered simply. Milk company. She smiled at that. They are good listeners. So your son tells me. Eli looked up at him seriously. Mom talks to the cows when she thinks I'm asleep. She tells them her secrets. Sarah laughed, embarrassed. Eli, it's true, he insisted. She tells them she's tired. The laughter faded. Sarah's hand tightened around her son's. For a moment, she looked far older than she was, as if the effort of holding herself together was finally showing. I just need one good day, she said softly, almost to herself. One day where I don't have to pretend I'm fine. The rancher didn't trust his voice, so he nodded. The bidding slowed. The auctioneer scanned the crowd. The rancher raised his hand before he could think better of it. Sarah turned sharply toward him, eyes widening. You don't have to, she said quickly. There are other buyers. I know, he replied. But I want to. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the yard. Sold. Eli gasped, then grinned. You bought her. Sarah's eyes shone, not with excitement but with something close to relief. She pressed her fingers to her mouth, steadying herself. Thank you, she said, the words trembling. You have no idea what that means. He did, though. It meant a quiet barn filled with breath and warmth. It meant mornings with purpose. It meant, maybe something else. As the handlers led the cow away, Sarah suddenly swayed. The rancher was on his feet before he realized it, steadying her elbow. She was lighter than he expected, fragile as a bird. I'm okay, she insisted, though her voice wavered. Just tired. 3. By the time the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in streaks of rose and gold, the rancher found himself standing at the edge of the pasture he had once considered empty. But now it felt alive, filled with the soft hum of possibility. The cow, newly his, moved across the field with a calm grace, each step a steady drumbeat against the uncertainty that had shadowed his life for so long. Eli ran ahead, small boots kicking up dust, laughing in a way that made the rancher's chest ache. It was a pure sound, untainted by worry or exhaustion, and it reminded him of mornings he had long forgotten, the kind of mornings where life was possible again. Sarah followed, slower than her son, but with a lightness he hadn't expected. Her face was pale, but there was color returning to her cheeks, and her eyes sparkled as she took in the rolling pasture, the sky, the smell of grass and hay. The rancher offered his hand when she wavered near the fence. She took it after a heartbeat, and he felt the strange, grounding warmth of human connection. He had been alone for too long, and he realized, almost painfully, how much he had needed this, not just a cow, not just a distraction, but the fragile pulse of family, even if temporary at first. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice soft, still tinged with exhaustion but carrying hope now. You changed everything today. I just did what anyone would, the rancher said, brushing dust from his jeans. But he knew it wasn't true. He had gone far beyond his ordinary routine. He had stepped into someone else's world, into pain and fear, and offered something more than words. Something tangible, and in doing so, he had opened the door to a life that had once seemed closed to him forever. Eli ran to the cow, leaning against her side as if greeting an old friend. See, Mom, he said, she listens, she likes me. He looked back at the rancher and grinned, a mischievous, triumphant grin that made the rancher's heart tighten. The boy's resilience was astonishing, the way he could carry sorrow on such small shoulders and still find joy in little things. Watching him, the rancher felt something shift, something tender, protective, and fiercely alive. Sarah laughed, a clear sound that mingled with Eli's excitement. "You're right," she admitted. "She is gentle." Her hands lingered on her son's shoulders, as if grounding herself in the ordinary miracle of the moment. "And maybe not everything has to end today." The rancher nodded, feeling a strange lightness that he hadn't known for years. It was the beginning of something new, fragile and uncertain, but utterly real. He watched as Sarah led Eli through the pasture, her movements still careful but more confident, each step reclaiming a little bit of strength she had feared lost forever. He could see the bond between mother and son deepen with every laugh, every whispered word, every touch of comfort. And in the quiet spaces between them, he found a space for himself, too, a place that had been closed off by years of solitude and routine. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the land, Sarah sat on the porch of the small house he had offered her. She looked over the pasture, the cow resting nearby, Eli asleep at her side after a day of unrestrained play. "I can't believe this," she murmured, voice almost reverent. "You've given us a chance. You've given me something, too," the rancher said quietly. He leaned against the railing, watching her. "I didn't know I could feel like this again. Like there's more to life than just surviving." Sarah met his gaze, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You saved more than a day. You saved hope." She paused, looking at Eli, sleeping peacefully. "You didn't just buy a cow. You bought time. You bought laughter. You bought this." The rancher swallowed, emotions tight in his throat. He realized he had never imagined this life for himself. Not the cow, not the laughter of a child, not the fragile, trembling hope of a mother clinging to one more day. And yet, here it was, unfolding with quiet insistence, demanding to be seen, felt, and embraced. Weeks passed, and the initial tension of mortality began to loosen its grip. Sarah regained strength, aided by the doctor the rancher had called, whose careful instructions and steady presence transformed fear into manageable hope. The boy, Eli, thrived in the light of care and attention, his laughter filling the house and pasture like music. The rancher, once lonely and set in the rhythm of routine, found himself drawn into the rhythms of this new life, the milking, the feeding, the small victories and tiny celebrations of survival and growth. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sun sink into the horizon, Eli turned to the rancher, small hands tugging at his coat. "Mommy says you changed our last day into our first," he whispered, eyes wide and earnest. His words were not a question but a revelation, a truth too profound for his age, and the rancher felt something he had long thought impossible, the gentle, insistent warmth of belonging. Sarah leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "He's right," she said softly. "You made today, and every day after, something worth living for." The rancher looked out at the pasture, at the cow grazing peacefully, at Eli's small, sleeping form, at the woman who had taught him that courage could be gentle, that hope could survive in fragile vessels. And for the first time in years, he felt the deep, unshakable certainty that life, even in its quiet, unremarkable moments, could be extraordinary. The loneliness that had once defined him began to dissolve, replaced by something he hadn't dared to imagine: connection, purpose, and a family that chose him as much as he had chosen them. He realized that sometimes, the smallest acts, raising a hand to bid, offering help without expectation, believing in tomorrow, could change everything. And in the soft twilight, as shadows stretched long across the pasture, he understood fully, they had all been given a new beginning, and in that beginning, they had found each other.